ローガ。今回の我々の任務はオセアニア大陸内部へ進行し、ラグナロックの秘密基地を発見。後続の航空部隊の攻撃目標を明らかにすることだ。
戦術衛星スカイアイズより入電。敵ガンシップ2機9時の方向に待ち伏せしていた模様。同時侵入中の大砲01、02、04、05も敵襲に遭遇。苦戦中の模様です。
白兵戦を挑んでくるらしいな。装甲騎兵小隊、上部デッキで敵を迎撃せよ。ここまで来て作戦中止などシャレにもならん。ミッション1、ローガ。
Hey guys, it's EX Master with a final shot. I'll be providing commentary on this replay I recently completed on the classic from Data East, entitled Wolfang, Kuga 2001, also known in Western territories as Roga Armor Force. This is originally an arcade title that was released in the year 1991, but ports of it showed up later in the decade for the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. In recent time, our friends at City Connection ported the Saturn edition to modern gaming platforms, along with its sequel, Skullflame, as part of its Saturn Tribute series. And as a boosted title, it has some extra features, like an arranged soundtrack. Anyway, this stage is short and easy. The real game begins in stage 2. See you there.
シドニーに敵前線部隊が展開しているようだ。直ちに進行し、敵前線部隊を撃破、突破せよ。
支援用ウェポンはキャリアで射出します。回収して使用してください。
ミッション2、強襲。
You may have noticed that this game doesn't quite play in our typical shmup fare, resembling more of a run and gun style instead of our usual spaceships and fighter planes. It's close enough though. Wolfang's biggest gimmick is that you can pick from 4 different types of mecha configuration to pilot at the beginning of the game. But that's not all, because you have the option to create a custom mech, where you can combine the parts of these 4 different mechs into a combination of 64 different types. I just chose to use the default type, Sotoru, because I've noticed from watching other replays it doesn't really get showcased that much. It's a balanced mech overall, with no real strengths or weaknesses. which is probably why it doesn't get picked as much. Custom builds seem to be the most popular as people tailor them to their particular playstyles. Tenrai or Type 2's special weapon in particular, the EMP field generator, seems to be very popular for its bullet canceling ability, and therefore is probably the most recommended part for beginners. Other parts affect your movement speed, your jumping ability, and the capacity of the helper dudes that you can collect throughout the stage. It also affects your melee attack when you get close to enemies. The type I'm using has a very fast knuckle punch, which I prefer because it gets rid of enemies quickly. The other melee weapons look cooler to use, but they come out slower. So this stage 2 is much longer than the first stage and is more like a proper introduction to the game. In an introduction to the difficulty, when I first started playing this game, I couldn't even make it past this stage with 1 credit. The best way I can describe it is that there's sort of a rhythm that you have to get used to for this particular game in order to do well in it. Here's our first proper boss, Moby Dick, aka Killer Whale, depending on what version you're playing. To defeat it, I'm using a technique that I think shows off an underrated capability of Sogeru's homing missiles. When they all hit one target, they're very powerful, and they'll make short work of this boss.
こちら大砲03、司令部より以下の作戦エリアへの進行の要請がありました。レバーで選択し、ボタンで進行エリアを決定してください。
ニュージーランド島南部の森林地帯の敵部隊を突破せよ。
ニュージーランド方面へ展開予定の大砲06が敵の襲撃に遭い、戦線より離脱しました。戦闘支援回線からの入電によると、本体の突入の障害となる攻撃基地があるようです。敵部隊中央を突破して次のエリアに向かってください。
ミッション 3B 漆黒の牙。
That was the first of 2 route splits, where I chose the so-called easy path of going to New Zealand. To give some story context for what's going on for non-Japanese speakers, including myself, Wolfang is the middle game in a trilogy. It's the sequel to 1989's Kuga, Operation Cold Vapor Trail, or just Vapor Trail as it's called in the Western world. The overreaching narrative of the series details the struggle between various global armed forces and the evil Ragnarok organization, who wishes to subjugate the world with military might. In Wolfang, advances in technology have led to the creation of mecha combat suits. Factories for these mecha combat weapons are largely concentrated in the Oceania region, and Ragnarok has successfully co-opted many of these factories. In response, a joint strike force between the United States and Australia deploys to the Australia region to liberate these factories from Ragnarok forces using their armored cavalry battle mechs. This is the first mini-boss-like enemy. We'll see this guy pop up a couple more times. What I'm trying to do is get him to drum slash at me so I can nail him with attacks. He'll block everything otherwise. Provided he jumps at you enough times, he should go down pretty quickly. Well, in a regular run of Wolfang, There's 4 different paths you can take depending on what route splits you choose. There's also a special mode, which removes the intermission cutscenes and takes you through every stage of the game. The special version is actually locked to the Western version of Warframe Rogue Armor Force, so you'll always play that whenever you play that conversion. I chose not to do that though, and my pick of the routes wasn't really determined by difficulty, but just what was my favorite route to play through. And really, the difficulty doesn't matter that much anyway, because like I mentioned earlier, this game is very difficult. Enemies come at you pretty relentlessly. I believe there's a rank system that intensifies things if you're playing well. What also doesn't help is the huge size of your sprite, or namely, the huge size of your hitbox. You're an easy target to hit for the type of small, concentrated, non-telegraphed fire your enemies like to shoot at you. That means you really have to pay attention to what's going on, and a small recovery window means that you can lose a lot of health really quickly with reckless play.
こちら大砲0戦闘支援回線からの通報によると敵大型イオノクラフト EB1 が接近中。弱点は機体下部のエンジンノズル部と分析されています。注意してください。
So for this aerial boss, EB1, I picked up the laser and I'm just going to start melting its underside. The only thing I had to look out for was that boomerang type shot. Otherwise, the laser will make short work of it.
こちら大砲03司令部より以下の作戦エリアへの進行の要請がありました。レバーで選択しボタンで進行エリアを決定してください。
クック海峡海底にあると思われる敵ミサイル基地を発見せよ。
海底にあると思われる中距離ミサイルミズガルズオルムを撃破して本体の突入を援護願います。
ミッション 4C ミズガルズオルム。
Alright, let's turn things up a bit and go to a hard difficulty stage. I actually took more of a beating than I would have liked in that last stage, so I'm making a concentrated effort to play more carefully this time around. I decided to keep the laser for the underwater section, coming up pretty soon here. Despite the hard difficulty label, I actually think this stage isn't all that bad. Mainly because you have a free range of movement in the water. I think this makes it a bit easier to dodge all the projectiles and obstacles coming at you. You still have to pay attention to what's going on though, as you can see. The laser in this stage does a good job of covering everything and taking out those mines since they're all lined up like that. Among the regular weapons you can use, you've already seen the Vulcan shot and the cluster shot. The Vulcan shot is the weaker of the two, but it does a good job of covering everything that comes on the screen. The cluster shot doesn't have as wide as coverage, but is still pretty good at that, and has a fairly high amount of power for concentrated fire. There's another type of weapon you haven't seen yet, the grenade gun, which I'll be using pretty soon. That one has the narrowest amount of coverage, but it has a special property where the explosions will be able to cancel out bullets. It's very handy against bosses, but it's not so great in regular stages when there's a bunch of enemies swarming you. So a couple things I'm paying attention to going into this stage is the position of the mines. They suddenly come from the top and bottom, so I'm just trying to make sure that I don't position myself to accidentally hit them. Those green enemies can be tricky, so I'm trying to make sure I position myself to be ready for their attack, because they come at you pretty quick when they shoot. They're especially dangerous when they attack you from behind, which is a good ambush position. Trying to take the enemies out before they have a chance to fire at me is a strategy I'm using not only in this stage, but generally throughout the entire game. I should mention that I'm playing the actual Saturn mode of the game, which is slightly different from the arcade version. Some of the enemy positions are slightly remixed, and some of the gameplay mechanics have subtly changed as well. On the ground, your mech can double jump, for instance, instead of the arcade version where it can only do it once. In both versions, you can also dash by pressing the designated button or pressing down in the jump button. Though I personally dislike it because I often find myself accidentally dashing right into enemy fire.
こちら大砲03敵大型潜水艇スティングレーが接近している模様。弱点は頭部センサーユニットと思われます。気をつけてください。
Now personally, I think the boss, Stingray, is the hardest boss on this path by far. He'll spam the screen with a variety of annoying attacks. Noticed I picked up the grenade gun for its bullet canceling properties, just for this reason. Needless to say, it took a lot of save state practicing to find the optimal way to beat it. On top of all these problematic things, it also has a truckload of health. So I'm trying to stay in front of it and point blank its weak spot in front. I don't want to go behind it at this point because I'll have to deal with the tail and some other annoying attacks. I found this semi-safe spot where I can mostly deal with the homing missiles it shoots out, while I wait for it to get behind me again. I was trying to destroy it before it got to the edge of the screen again, but no such luck. Unfortunately, I took a hit there, which I don't like. But it doesn't have much gas left in the tank, so I should be able to finish it in its next cycle. All in all, I got through that stage relatively unscathed, which is good considering what's being thrown at me in the next stage.
「動画チームは高速潜水艦ナーガにて敵海底基地を強襲。本体に向けられたミズガルズオルムの発射を阻止せよ。
ローガチームミズガルズオルム撃破後は速やかに離脱してください。作戦コードソウル開始してください。
ミッション 5C ソウル
That was a rather tense opening for me just because I had to concentrate to pick up the cluster gun without getting hit. A much better option going into this stage than using a grenade gun. This is the final stage of this path and my favorite overall in the entire game. compared to the others is very fast paced and exciting. And you gotta love that opening sequence where your command unit just decides to plow through the enemy base and start raising hell. There's another mecha shooter that came out a couple decades later from this, for the PlayStation Portable and later PC, that G Black and I were both very fond of, that was called Armored Hunter Gunhound EX. It had a similar opening sequence in its final stages, so I had to wonder if they got the idea from Wolfang. Okay, now we got two of these big boys. Tweedledee and Tweedledum, I call them. The best way to beat them is to remember that one charges at you and one jumps at you, and use that knowledge to try to position them in a spot you like. I don't do the best job there, so my health is lower than I would like it to be. So now I'm just trying to survive this second half intact and hold on to as much health as I can. Now it's especially important for me to take out enemies before they have a chance to swarm me. A much needed life pack there. I'll need all the help I can get for this finale. This is when things get really crazy. After barely coming out of that wild section alive, the game decides to do me a favor and give me an extra health pack at least.
戦闘支援回線からの情報ではミズガルゾーリンのガード氏に空想攻撃ミスベルが起動していることを確認したようです戦闘能力は予測不能弱点は胸部コクピットと予測されています
This is the final battle against Muspel, also known as Gigantes. Now I'm already feeling the pressure because I only have 2 units of health left, which means there's little room for error here. Precision is especially key here in order to dodge all of his attacks. Uh-oh, that's not good. Now the pressure is really on. One more hit and I lose my mech. Actually, if that happens, your character can fight on without it. But this is an undesirable state, because your firepower is greatly reduced, and you're down for good on the next hit. It's a matter of perfect positioning myself between those lasers now to outlast this beast. And making sure I intercept those homing missiles so one of them doesn't nick me. It was down to the wire, but I survived. And so we come to the end of my Wolfang campaign. I'll end my commentary here. I'm EX. Enjoy the ending, and thanks as always for watching.
ムスベル撃破。
ミズガルゾールムも誘爆します直ちに脱出してください
いや無理だこいつの推力じゃ間に合わないぜ
諦めるのはまだ早いぜ。大砲03のお嬢さんからのチャーター便だぜ。さあ、引っ張り上げるから早く捕まりな。
ローガチーム爆心地から離脱しました作戦は成功のようです
あとは本体がどう動くかだな。
そうですね
よし、救出地点に急げ。もたもたしていると間に合わんぞ。